So, what happens when a country, feeling cornered, threatens all-out war? That's what we're diving into today. We're going to break down this incredibly tense standoff between the US and Iran, looking at the threats flying back and forth, but also the fires burning inside Iran that could push this whole thing right over the edge. Let's get into it.
Yeah, there's really no mistaking what they mean here. This one single statement from Iran's leadership, all-out war, it's the backdrop for everything we're about to talk about. It's a line in the sand, and it raises the stakes to the absolute maximum. We're talking about a potential conflict with truly global consequences.
All right, so here's how we're going to break this all down. First, we'll dig into that all-out war threat. Then we're going to look at some really unique protests happening inside Iran right now. After that, we'll check out the military buildup in the Gulf, zero in on what the US considers its bottom line, and finally, we'll tie it all together and talk about why this really matters to you.
Okay, first up, that incredibly stark warning coming out of Tehran. You know, this isn't just tough talk. It's a very calculated message, and it's shaping how every single player in the region is acting right now. But you see, this kind of aggressive posture, it doesn't just pop up in a vacuum. It's a reaction to a whole bunch of complex pressures. And to really get why a government would risk something like an all-out war, we have to look past the external threats for a minute and turn our attention to the crisis that's exploding within their own borders. And that brings us to what's happening on the streets of Iran. It's directly connected, believe it or not, to the threats its leaders are making to the rest of the world. This fire from within is actually fueling the conflict abroad, and it's a completely different kind of protest than what we've seen there before.
Look, we've all seen massive protests in Iran before, right? But they were almost always sparked by one single thing, like a stolen election or a tragic death. What's going on now is, well, it's fundamentally different. This isn't about one moment of outrage. This is being fueled by a deep, systemic, countrywide economic failure that's hitting everyone every single day.
And the fallout from this failure is just staggering. Their currency is in an absolute freefall. I mean, just imagine selling something today and the cash you get is worth noticeably less by tomorrow. People are literally watching their life savings just evaporate. And that desperation is what keeps driving them back to the streets, even when they're facing a brutal, violent crackdown. And this is the real kicker. You can't arrest your way out of an economic collapse. See, unlike a political scandal, this underlying problem doesn't go away with force. As long as the economy is failing, the people will keep coming back out. And that puts the regime in a really desperate corner, which, helps explain why they're being so aggressive with the rest of the world.
Okay, so now let's zoom out from that internal turmoil and look at the military chess match that's playing out right now in the waters of the Persian Gulf.
This is the question on everybody's mind, isn't it? You've got Iran's all-out war threat on one side and US warships moving into the region on the other. So, is a direct military conflict unavoidable at this point?
Well, the US has definitely responded with a huge show of force. There's a growing naval presence, what some have even called an armada, and it's sending a very clear message that military options are absolutely on the table. And if you look at history, Iran's conventional military is at a serious disadvantage, which brings us to maybe the most critical piece of real estate in this whole standoff. This is the Strait of Hormuz. It might look tiny on a map, but this narrow little choke point is one of the most strategically important waterways on the entire planet. And the reason why is really simple: energy. Just let that number sink in for a second. A full quarter, 25%, of all the oil the world uses every single day has to pass through this one tiny choke point. Any kind of disruption here would send shockwaves through the global economy almost overnight.
And this is where you see the huge paradox for Iran. Their biggest strategic move, their biggest threat, is to shut down the strait. But if they actually did it, it would be total economic suicide. It would cut off their own oil money and basically pour gasoline on the very economic fire that's driving the protests back home.
So you've got all these moving parts, right? Protests, military posturing, economic threats. But what is the one thing, the one issue, that the United States sees as completely non-negotiable?
Well, you see, the ultimate goal for the US here isn't necessarily about toppling the government. The focus is actually much, much narrower. It all boils down to stopping Iran from getting their hands on one specific thing.
And there it is. That's the absolute red line. The core US concern at the end of the day is the possibility of a nuclear weapon ending up in the hands of Iran's theocratic leadership. That is seen as a direct threat to the American homeland, and that's the issue that's really driving this entire conflict. Okay, so let's bring all this home.
We've talked about geopolitics, military strategy, but why should this standoff happening halfway across the world really matter to you, wherever you happen to be watching from?
Because ultimately, Washington doesn't see this as some distant regional issue. The fear isn't just about instability in the Gulf, it's about national security right here at home. From the U.S. perspective, a nuclear-armed Iran is seen as a direct existential threat to the mainland United States.
And so that leaves us with this one final, really critical question. When a regime is failing at home, when it's crumbling from the inside, does it become more dangerous to the outside world, or does it just become weaker? The answer to that question could be the difference between all-out war and maybe, just maybe, a path toward peace. Thanks for joining this Explainer.